So, welcome once again, friends. To take our discussion further, in the last class, we talked about Bijay Misra and Sudesh Misra, how they have, theorized diaspora or how they want us to look at it. In the same tradition, we are going forward with Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy, two very important, powerful cultural critics of our time. Stuart Hall, as we know, was born in Jamaica and was a British Marxist sociologist, cultural theorist, and political activist. And along with Richard Hogarth and William Raymonds, is known as the founding father of cultural studies. And many of his formulations are very, very important when it comes to the understanding of cultural dynamics. So he has been associated with British cultural studies, known as Birmingham School of Cultural Studies, and he was also a founder of prestigious journal New Left Review. He is, as I said, he is considered as one of the pioneers in expanding the scope of cultural studies as a discipline. So some of his famous works include, cultural studies, a theoretical history, selected political writings, the great moving right, and other essays, familiar stranger, a life between two islands, and his essay Cultural Identity and Diaspora, that was published in 1996, will be of a special relevance to us. So, we find that he extensively covers topics that are uh, typical of diasporic identity, like identity, race, diaspora, media, and representation. And all of us know that he himself was a diasporic subject, a Caribbean diasporic in the UK, and much of his work is shaped by his own personal experiences of being a diasporic, a black diasporic in a white country. So they have shaped his perspectives on race, identity, and displacement. And as I said, especially in his essay, Cultural Identity and Diaspora, he challenges the idea of a fixed, essential identity because he believes that identity keeps changing. It is shaped and reshaped by historical processes. So he proclaims that culture is fluid, and so is the identity, which is shaped by history, culture, and migration. So he gives two perspectives on cultural identity, and he says that cultural identity and diaspora are simultaneously as political, historical, and personal, and identity as a shared essence. So there are two concepts of identity that he talks about. One is the essentialist definition, emphasizing similarity and oneness. So this particular formation looks at identity as something that is fixed, stable, and rooted in a common past. And basically, most of the people try to promote this idea of identity by homogenizing the diasporic subjects. But then, it's questionable whether the different people belonging to a land have the same kind of adherence or loyalty or understanding of the cultural practices of that nation. So, and again, whether talking about them in any homogeneous fashion will certainly make sense. So, identity as a shared essence sees identity as fixed, stable, and rooted in a common past, and it believes that all members of a cultural group share one collective identity and so a sense of oneness. Now, Stuart Hall finds it relevant and important in the context of the diasporic communities, uh, because it provides them a particular kind of fabric to identify themselves with all the people uh, belonging to the same country, and in a way helps them unite with each other and fight for their rights and fight all the odds pitted against them. So, in a way, this essentialist notion of identity helps initially, but then Hall critiques this because he finds it overly simplistic, as it ignores the complexities of migration, colonization, and hybridity. He believes that the diasporic subjects don't follow one particular culture, rather uh, by demands of this situation and by virtue of transnationalism, they have to simultaneously combine their home culture with the host culture in order to survive. So they don't live in a culture that is fixed, rather, it's a hybrid culture that is always in the process of becoming or being. So his second concept of identity is that identity is a process of becoming and being rather than something that is fixed and given. So here he talks about similarities and differences amongst an imagined cultural group. For instance, he talks about the black triangle of Africa, the USA, the Caribbean, and the UK. And while people essentialize all of their identities as one African identity, uh, if we look at them, we'll find that their identities are shaped by different kinds of experiences, and so quintessentially, their identities, other than their racial identity, are different and have to be viewed differently in order to realize their complex nature. So he believes that identity is not something that we possess or which comes to us naturally, but it is something that is constantly in the making. So, and it is also contingent upon certain conditions. So he says that cultural identity is not a fixed essence lying unchanged outside history and culture, but a matter of positioning, and that is why it has to be looked at as a process of becoming and being rather than a finished or a stable entity. So identity is shaped by colonial histories, displacements, and the cultural exchanges of diaspora, and that is the reason when we talk about the identities of different diasporic subjects, we'll still find the difference in their uh, process of identity formation and how their identities are shaped and reshaped. Regarding diaspora, he emphasizes that it exists in a space of belonging and unbelonging, that is, in a space of in betweenness. And here I would like you to recall our discussion on Bhabha's third space or liminality, where again we talked about the diasporic subjects belonging nowhere, neither here nor there, but something in between. So their liminal position is also emphasized by Stuart Hall in this cultural critic, and he suggests that diasporic communities are constantly reinventing themselves and their identities by mixing and hybridizing influences from different cultures. So, here we also refer back to Bhabha's hybridity, where we find that the identity of a diasporic subject is not governed by one particular culture, maybe the home culture or the host culture. Rather, it is a mix of both the cultures, forming a new identity altogether. He also emphasizes that cinema should allow the diasporas to recognize and construct their identities, acknowledging both the influence of their homeland and the new cultural context. He's a little, critical of cinema being more in favor of a stable, fixed identity projection rather than talking about identity as something fluid, which is always under process of being and becoming. If we talk about Hall's idea of identity, he always emphasizes that it is contingent and not a historical or fixed, and so it is not always independent of the realities and the experiences that we have gone through. So that's why it is always in the process of evolution, or it is always in evolving phase, and so we need to look at it that way. When we talk about Paul Gilroy, another very well known English sociologist who has distinct contributions in the field of cultural studies, critical race studies, and African American studies, we again find that we get lot of insight into the understanding of a diasporic subject, uh, especially his works The Empire Strikes Back, Race and Racism in 70s Britain, There Aren't No Black in the Union Jack, The Black Atlantic, Modernity and Double Consciousness, Against Race, Post Colonial Melancholia, Darker Than Blue. They're all powerful treatises dealing with the subject of subject formation and identity in a distinct land. So he has transformed thinking across disciplines from ethnic studies, British and American literature, African American studies, Black British studies, transatlantic history, and critical race theory to post colonial theory. And he has reshaped our understanding of political and cultural history by showing that African diaspora, largely driven by racial slavery, was not limited to any one country or community. Instead, it was a global social, political, and cultural movement that challenged the idea that identity is tied to a single nation. So, identity is not tied to a single nation because the African people were taken to different places around the world and they did not come from a single nation. Still, as a race, they were similar, and that's why they're treated as one people. So, Gilroy thinks that identity is not tied to a single nation, rather, we can look at it from the race point of view. More importantly, he argues that the African diaspora played a key role in shaping modern society rather than being separate from it. Because, again, we need to realize that the diasporic communities are influenced by the cultures of the host countries, but at the same time, they also transform the cultures of those countries as well. So it is something that is, both ways. It is not one way, um, as we realize in this process. In his book, Then No Black, he targets English Marxists who could not understand the importance of thinking carefully about race, sociologists who portrayed Britain's black population as either victims or criminals, the new racism of Thatcher's Britain, because they were undermined. Either they were projected as victims or criminals, and they were never treated as the citizens like anybody else in that country. And there was always a racist angle to that, which is you know criticized by Gilroy. In the book, Gilroy took riots and social movements to be as politically significant as any political party or trade union, because he believed that these social movements were able to bring transformation not only in these diasporic communities but also in the host culture. And as a result, many wrongs of history were at least tried to be corrected. So this book critiques the British nationalism, which is racist and only believes that it's a nation that belongs to the whites alone. And there is some kind of embedded racism in the public discourse which Gilroy critiques. He says that the idea of British nationalism should be inclusive, because it is formed by all subjects irrespective of their caste, creed, and race, and that is why they should all be acknowledged and uh, included in our idea of British nationalism. And the Britishness, the notion of Britishness, should not be confined to white alone. Rather, it should also be extended to all those races and peoples who have come to contribute to Britain. So recently I visited UK, and I found that the UK population has drastically changed, in which out of 10 people, as many as 6 to 7 people are colored people, and only 3 to 4 people are whites. So this has to be properly acknowledged, that British nationalism is not exclusively white anymore. Rather, it is formed and contributed to by people of different races coming to Britain, contributing to its economy, culture, and society. This book remains one of the foundational texts in race studies, diaspora theory, and post colonial criticism, reshaping discussions on race and identity in Britain. In his seminal work, The Black Atlantic, Modernity and Double Consciousness, he challenges the nation based views of identity, arguing that black identity is transnational, shaped by migration, slavery, and cultural exchange across the Atlantic. And it has to be viewed in totality just like that. And their identities are collective identities. They are not identities, let's say, the identities of these African people are not the identities of Nigerians or Kenyans or uh, Zambians. They are the identities of black people as a whole, and they have been shaped by their histories of migration, slavery, and cultural exchange across the Atlantic. So he introduces the term Black Atlantic to refer to a dynamic space where African, American, Caribbean, and European influences merge to form a new kind of culture or cultural identity. He draws from W.E.B. Du Bois, the double consciousness, and he highlights how black individuals navigate multiple cultural identities, because their cultural identity has been shaped by history of their migration, slavery, and cultural exchanges. So, and again, he believes that music is central to understanding, this idea of narrow nationalism. And in his view, the history of black music is a powerful demonstration of how cultures, races, identities are all mongrel things which can't be neatly packed into ethnic parcels. So it's very important to understand the cultural dynamics of the 20th century, in which there is nothing called pure nationality or pure identity, and we need to look at it as a dynamic cultural exchange in which several races come together and enter into a new kind of space which is welcoming and recognizing, contributions of all the people. So by quoting an example of the black music, which is a kind of mongrel combining several forms, taking from several traditions music, he wants us to understand that the same is true of our cultural identity as well, because there cannot be anything that can be treated as pure, sanitized, or let's say a typical national cultural identity, because this is all fluid and this is always in a dynamic exchange, forming and unforming at the same time. And as a result, there has to be a kind of approach which is inclusive rather than exclusive. And that is why he is very critical of UK society, which continues to believe that, the whites are the true inheritors of the land and its culture, and all other people, especially the black people, are othered based on their race and appearance, and their contributions are never recognized as legitimate and, worthy of the same kind of appreciation and acknowledgement. So friends, these two critics, cultural critics, are very very important to our reason, and their understanding and their cultural formations certainly would further our understanding of a diasporic subject. And all through we have seen that critic after critic are vouching for a space where, we enter into some kind of meaningful exchange rather than uh, being colored in our own limited vision of the world, uh, where, the people are othered or excluded. So friends, these are the references, you can refer to them. And thank you very much. We continue this discussion in our next class as well. Thank you very much.